Office Depot Office Max has great deals on everything you need to succeed, like stylish furniture and chairs to keep you working comfortably, the latest tech to keep you organized and productive, calendars and planners to keep you on schedule, and cleaning supplies to keep your space spotless. It's the perfect time to stock up on the supplies you need to succeed, from the office to your home and everywhere in between. Need it fast? No problem. Place your order at OfficeDepot.com and pick it up in just 20 minutes at your nearest Office Depot or Office Max store.
Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy, Wallace, and Maricella, Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Kristy Wallace, with my co-host, Maricella, Herrera. Maricella, I almost forgot what I was saying when I started that.
Wait, what?
I was like, hello and welcome, and then I just blanked. I'm like, what am I saying right now?
Okay, you need a break.
Well, so as you've heard me talk about it, school has recently gone back in session, and I'm a little bit type A, and
I love that you say a little bit.
I'm a lot.
I didn't know you.
Right? Well, and I have, I have our family calendar, and I have everyone's schedules in the calendar, and we have 2 different schools. One of them is new because my son just started middle school, and just lots of communication. And I have to, honestly, just huge respect to the teachers in the New York City school districts. They're navigating some really hard times and doing their best to support our kids and to make huge strides over last year when it came to remote learning and how they can set the kids up for success. But wow, it's hard. It's just so many different platforms and logins and communication styles and, schedules and just emails. So yeah, I'm in the thick of it right now.
It sounds like so much, honestly. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you do it.
Well, I do it in part because we've got a great company. And, my guest today, Carly Fiorina, who's just a powerhouse and had some phenomenal advice on leadership and management, feedback and culture, also shared some stories that will, give you some major eye roll action. But we talked during our conversation around just culture and the humans we work with. And so I would say, when you commented, how do you do it? It's not easy. For so many of us, all of us, life has been really difficult, the past couple of months and before that, but it's easier to navigate these times when you feel supported. And that's the people you have in your life, like you, Maricella.
Aww.
And the people you work alongside, and the place that, in which you do work, where you feel seen for your whole identity, and able to, say, hey, I have, 10 school meetings within 2 hours on Friday morning. I might need some space to make sure I can get my kids on Google Classroom. And that's okay. And everyone will say, okay, how can I help? What do you need? So it's, I think this is a time to look at some things that give me hope. It's a time of really, seeing the true colors of the people you work alongside and where you work, and understanding how supported you are in all of your identity.
Yeah. It's interesting as you say that, how, the changes that have happened this year really do show how important it is to have those connections, even if you're not right next to each other, if you're not seeing each other, say, face to face. But it takes a village for all of us to be in a good spot, and it's so important to have people around us that are supportive.
Yeah. And I'd also say, something that's really held a lot of importance in my life the past couple of months is we've started doing these roundtables at Ellevate. One that I lead every week is our corporate executive roundtable, getting senior leaders in business together. And we have a set theme every week that we're working through as leaders and as humans. And it's really been a highlight of my week, because I feel that I can talk with others who are going through similar challenges. There's always someone in the room that, has already navigated the challenge or has some good insights that we're learning from. There's always someone who's in the same spot where you are. It's just feeling like you're not alone, but also being able to tackle a lot of these challenges or opportunities in what I feel is a very proactive way. Because there's there's a lot of need sometimes to just complain with a friend or vent or whatever it is, but then you want to do something about it and you want to take action. And I think that is certainly a value of ours at Ellevate, but it's an important part of feeling in control of your destiny to the best that you can be. And so having this weekly discussion with others that are very proactive and how do we keep moving forward has really left me inspired and energized and motivated.
Yeah, it's a great event series to be able to have those conversations.
Yeah. Well, let's get to another important conversation, which is my interview with Carly Fiorina.
I cannot lie. I am so excited about this. I am a little bit fangirling about this. Carly Fiorina has such a history in business and politics, but also it's a quintessential business school case. Her time at HP, so I'm really pumped for this one.
Yeah, I mean, she talks about the challenges she faced, especially in late 70s, 80s, moving up the ranks as one of the few, if not only, women. I'm laughing, but it's not funny. Like, some of these stories are outrageous. And then, but really just the lessons she learned along the way about leadership, around using your voice. And it's a great, I just the whole time was riveted by what she was sharing. So I'm excited for all of you to get to hear it too.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hi, Carly. It's such an honor to have you here on today's Ellevate podcast. Thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Kristy, for having me. I'm really happy to be with you and your listeners.
So you have just such an impressive career. I'm sure we all have admired you, followed you, been inspired by you. But I'm always interested in hearing someone's story from their own words. And you often say you went from secretary to CEO. So could you share a little bit about your story and those highlights over the years that have really helped to define who you are today?
Well, let me start without going on for too long, even before the secretary. I was, like many girls and women, I think, my orientation growing up was as a people pleaser, specifically as a parent pleaser. I was one of those kids. I was a middle child, but I wanted to do everything right. I wanted to be the, teacher's pet, the parent's pet. I wanted to please everyone. And so I worked hard and pleased my parents and graduated with a degree in medieval history and philosophy, which meant that I really was unemployable and not really having any plan as to what I should do. I did what my parents thought was a good idea. They thought I should go to law school because my dad was a law professor. He loved the law. Off I went to law school, and I discovered pretty quickly that I really, really hated it. And so for me, the first real decision I ever made on my own, and it was an incredibly difficult decision for me, was to go home and tell my dad and my mother, I'm quitting law school because I hate it and I don't know why I'm there. And it was a trauma for me. They were very disappointed. I didn't have any plans. I didn't know what I was going to do next. I had no idea how I was going to make any money, but I knew I had to pay my rent. And so I took the very first job that I was offered, which wasn't much. It was to type and file and answer the phones in a 9-person real estate firm. Honestly, I wasn't a secretary. I was a receptionist who answered the phones and really had no idea where I was going or what I was doing. But about 6 months into that job, 2 men who worked there came to my desk and said, we've been watching you. We think you could do more than type and file. Do you want to know what we do? And that was my introduction to business. And it was because of those 2 men that I eventually went on and got an MBA. But I also have never, ever forgotten what it felt like to have somebody take a chance on me and somebody to see something in me that I didn't see in myself. And so eventually I got that MBA and I landed at AT&T, which was a huge company then, 1 million employees. I was at the very bottom of the totem pole. I did not have aspirations to become a CEO. Honestly, I just wanted to make it through every day without getting fired because I felt like a fish out of water and totally out of place and totally unqualified, and there weren't very many women. We could talk about all the things that happened, but let me just say my first business meeting was in a strip club because that's where the guys went.
I'm laughing, but it's not
yes,
funny.
Yes, you're laughing because that's what you do. I mean, I do too in retrospect. When I became a manager for the first time, my boss introduced me to my new subordinates as Carly, our token bimbo. I mean, I could go on and on, but I tell those stories to say I didn't think I was going to become a CEO. I think it's fair to say. But to sort of cut to the chase, everywhere I looked, I saw problems. And I saw problems that had festered. And I saw people who understood the problems and who were frustrated by the problems, but who had never been asked to put their shoulder to the wheel with someone and solve the problems. And so I worked with people and I solved problems. And when you do that and when you take on tougher and tougher challenges, which I did because I figured out I kind of liked it. I liked problem solving. I liked challenges. I liked working with other people to make things better. People noticed. And I never shied away from a problem. I ran to them instead.
I love that story because, I associate with that. I think of myself as a problem solver as well. And I'm a CEO and as you have had just such an illustrious career and CEO of HP and board positions and beyond. But it does take, that special type of outlook to, in everything that you do, where is the opportunity to make an improvement, to make change? And I call that out because I think for all of our listeners, as we understand our role within our companies or the companies that we're creating or leading or even within the world, this aspect of seeing the problems and running to them versus away from them, I think can really define who we are, but also create, change, create progress, create improvement. And the hallmarks of leadership don't necessarily mean that you're a CEO or you're a manager. It means you're a leader of your situation and your environment. And Carly, I would love to hear your thoughts on leadership. I mean, everything from, the leader of a Fortune 50 CEO to board positions in the political landscape. You have such a long history of leadership in many situations. And you talk about this problem solving and your experiences. Like, how do you see all of that coming together? And how do you really look at leadership and who are our leaders?
Well, Kristy, first I want to punctuate 2 things that you just said, because I think they're so important. Our role as people, as women, is not to please everyone else. Our role is to make a positive impact. That's why we're here. That's our purpose. It just so happens that women get confused about that a lot. I think we naturally are pleasers. We want to be liked. But if you're going to make a positive impact, if you're going to make change, if you're going to make progress, to use your words, you're not going to please everyone all the time. It turns out I've learned over and over again that leadership actually has nothing to do with title or position. I mean, I used to think when I was that secretary and as I worked my way up in the corporate world, I thought, oh, well, it was usually a guy, the guy in the big office, he must be the leader because he has the big office. And then I came to realize, there are a lot of people with big offices, big titles, big egos to go along with that office and that title, but they're not leading. They're not solving the problems right in front of them. They're not making anything better. They're just doing the best they can with the way things are. And doing the best you can with the way things are is called management. There's nothing wrong with management, but it's not leadership. Leaders change the order of things for the better. And the only way you change the order of things for the better is to actually solve the problems that have to get solved. And so, yes, there are lots of people who sit in boardrooms and in C-suites or in Capitol Hill, but they're not leaders. They are managing from a very big position. The other thing that I think is true is in our culture today, we also not only confuse position and title with leadership, but we also confuse fame or power or influence with leadership. Some leaders have position, they have title, they have power, they have influence, but that isn't what makes them a leader. What makes someone a leader is they are solving the problems that they're meant to solve. And those are the problems that are right in front of them. They're changing the order of things for the better. They're serving something that's bigger than themselves. That is the essence of leadership. And when you think about it that way, it also is true, and I've learned this over and over again in my life. Anyone can lead, although people frequently choose not to, because leadership is also hard, and it comes along with its share of criticism. Because as I said earlier, if you're trying to solve problems, you're not going to please everyone. You're actually going to upset some people.
I remember the first time I was leading a team. It was a sales department, and it was a 360 review. And someone who I was managing said I was too mean, and then the person I was reporting into said I needed a thicker skin. And I remember that time because, yes, I wanted all the A's and, you're perfect in every way. I wanted to, be that pleaser. But then it was really disorienting because the feedback was so contradictory in many ways. And I just realized at that moment that I just had to be me. But Everything that you're saying, I'm just nodding my head like, yes, this is all so true. How did you, what were the moments in your career that really showed you this, that helped you come to that realization?
Well, I do think it's a process, not a moment, but there are moments that stand out. I'll tell you one story that stands out for me. When I quit law school and had to tell my parents, and oh my gosh, it was it was a traumatic thing for me to actually disappoint them, to say I quit. But in that moment, I realized this is my life. This is my life. I can't live it for someone else. I have to live it for myself. So fundamental. But I had to go to law school and really hate it to learn that, to learn this is my life, Another moment that I think of is I was I had been put in charge of a very large contract, a $25 billion contract. It was one of the largest contracts that AT&T had ever competed for. And we were partnered with a whole set of companies. I was the lowest ranking member of this very auspicious team, all of the rest of whom were men. And we were having a business dinner one night. I knew more about this contract than anyone else at the table. They all knew I knew more. I knew more. But in the course of this dinner, these guys start talking about, well, who's going to go answer the customer's questions? And for big government contracts, there's a very formalized process called orals where you answer the government's questions. And so the question came up, well, who's going to lead the oral examination of our response? Well, I was the obvious choice, but all the men around the table said, they're talking about it. And finally, one of them said, well, Carly's obviously the logical choice. They spoke about me as if I wasn't there. But, what if she's having that time of month? I mean, how will we be able to trust that she can handle it? And, they all kind of talked about that for a while. And I got up from the table. I was so stunned. I was so enraged. I got up from the table. I walked out into the parking lot, and I found myself walking around and around in circles in the parking lot, crying tears of rage. How was this possible? And, I sort of pulled myself together, and I came back to the table, and while I was terrified, my heart was pounding in my chest, I made a case for why I was the only person who could lead this effort, because I knew more about it than they did. Eventually, I would lead the effort. We would win the contract. But I went home that night and I said to myself, no one will ever, ever make me feel like that again. And that was my sort of moment when I realized, you know what? People are going to say all kinds of things about me. They're going to say them to my face. They're going to say them behind my back. And I really can't get hung up about what other people say about me or even what other people think about me. What I need to stay focused on is what I know about what I can do. And I need to go do that to the very best of my ability. So that was another one of those moments. And I guess the third moment that I would point out I would share is I remember I had a group of people and we were doing work for someone much higher up in the organization than me. And this executive would come down and just berate my team. I mean, really disrespect my team. And I remember one day after this had happened, looking at the code of conduct that the company supposedly espoused on the wall, and it said highest standards of respect. And I remember thinking to myself, this isn't respect. He's not respecting these people, most of whom were women. And so I called him and I said, Glenn, you can't treat people this way. And he got very offended and he said, do you know who I am? Do you know who you're dealing with? I mean, how can you possibly be speaking to me this way? And, very offensive and offended. And I sort of listened to that for a while. And then I said, Glenn, until and unless you apologize to this team and you treat them with respect, we will not do any more work for you. And I hung up the phone. And I told my team we won't do any more work for him. And about a week later, he came down and he apologized and he behaved differently and we did the work. And that was a reminder to me that how we do things matters as much as what we do, that behavior matters, that character matters, that culture and values have to be real. And that our role as leaders is not just to serve ourselves or our ambitions. Our role is to serve others and support others, and sometimes to stand up for others.
I'd love to hear more about that, because we oftentimes have conversations around, advocating for ourselves or advocating for others, how that can sometimes be uncomfortable, finding our voice. And you've shared in this conversation, how growing up you were the pleaser, you went to law school, you kind of, it seems like you had this epiphany of coming into yourself and making those decisions and that you wanted to make that made sense for you. And now, that situation at the dinner, which I'm just, again, shaking my head, you stood up for yourself. You spoke up. And I think, if I'm being honest, I may have just stayed there and been enraged and felt like I didn't have a voice in that conversation. And then you stood up for people on your team. And that means a lot. I mean, that is inspiring, but yet many of us still struggle with finding that voice and that confidence to use it. So do you have any advice to share about how you really refine that for you?
You know, Kristy, it's one of the reasons when people ask me, well, what are the characteristics of leadership? I always start with courage. Courage. Without courage, you cannot lead. The courage to speak up, the courage to speak out, the courage to take a risk, the courage not to please. And sometimes I think we believe that courage is the absence of fear. It's not. It's getting over fear. You know, people have sometimes said to me, oh my gosh, you're so brave or you're fearless. And I always say, no, I'm not. I just have a lot of practice. I have a lot of practice at overcoming fear. And I think it's true. You know, I mentioned my very first business meeting with colleagues was held in a strip club because that's where they went. I mean, my gosh, prior to showing up at that strip club, and I did show up because I didn't want them to scare me away from my first business meeting, but I spent hours on the floor in the ladies' room being afraid. The truth is we're all afraid. And a lot of times what we're afraid of are not existential things like, you know, I'm afraid I'm going to die. I'm afraid someone I love is going to die. I know what those fears are like because I've faced those as well. But we're afraid of smaller things, although they seem so large. I'm afraid of looking stupid. I'm afraid of making someone mad. I'm afraid of making a mistake. I'm afraid of failing. I'm afraid of getting criticized. And in order to get over those fears, which we must get over if we're going to lead, we have to just face them head on. And so what I say to people all the time is, name your fear. What are you afraid of? When I sat on the floor of that ladies' room, I had to say, okay, what am I afraid of? Well, I'm afraid of looking stupid. By the way, I did. I looked stupid walking into the strip club. And then I got to, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? I look stupid. Actually, an even worse thing that happens is that these guys know they scared me off and I don't get a chance to do my job. And so what I would say is all of us are afraid of things. And we all have to get over those fears in order to lead and to fulfill our own potential and to make an impact and to change things for the better. And the best way to learn how to get over fear is to just practice. Practice by facing it and saying, what am I afraid of? What's the worst thing that can happen? Let me deal with that. And then think about what the best thing that can happen is. Because in my experience, every time I've overcome fear, something really good comes out of that.
Thank you for that. That is a perspective that I hadn't fully grasped before. And hearing you say that, I'm like, yes, all right, conquer your fears. We can do this, you know, and yeah, good things will come from that. We're, you know, not so much fear, but pivoting more towards uncertainty and crisis, which, you know, it invokes fear in many of us as well. You've been talking a lot about the need for women in leadership positions during times of crisis, such as the one we're currently in. Can you share more about your thoughts around that?
Well, what is a crisis? A crisis is an unanticipated problem. You know, it's a big, huge problem, but nevertheless, it's an unanticipated problem. And so in crises in particular, we need leadership. Leadership to help us see through the fog, leadership to solve the problem. The thing is, I think women are natural problem solvers. Maybe we don't realize that's what leadership is, but I think women naturally have learned to collaborate with others. And in order to solve problems, collaboration is key. I think women so often are willing to say, my job is to serve others, not just myself. So if you put collaboration and service to others and problem solving together, that's leadership. And all of those things are required in a crisis. There's another thing that crises in particular require, which is always an essential element of leadership, and that's humility. You know, so often people in positions of leadership, and may I say men in positions of leadership, think that their job, because they're in a position, is to, stand tall and be strong and say they know it all. I know it all. I can do it all. I got all the answers. Well, guess what? That's exactly the wrong thing in a crisis. Because particularly in a crisis, how can you know it all? This is unanticipated and unforeseen. Humility is not a lack of self-confidence. It's critically important that we as women, that every leader know who you are, know what you know what your value is, know what you bring to the table. So humility isn't a lack of self-confidence, and it's not modesty. It's not false modesty. Oh, no, I couldn't possibly. No. Humility is the recognition, I cannot know it all. I cannot do it all. I need help. And it's that I need help that allows you to collaborate with others. And collaborating with others is essential to problem solving, and problem solving is what's required in a crisis. One more thing that I think is so essential to particularly leadership in a crisis, and that I think comes more naturally to women, and that is empathy. We need more empathy. But empathy is also a vital ingredient of leadership, because empathy is what allows you to see and hear someone else, even if they're different than you are. And when you're dealing with a crisis, a bunch of unforeseen problems, and you need help from others, you're humble enough to know that. It takes empathy to see and hear someone's different perspective. And boy, do we need empathy in a pandemic, and boy, do we need empathy in a time of racial reckoning in our country. Humility, empathy, and collaboration are vital to problem solving, and women tend to gravitate towards those things sometimes more naturally than men, particularly those who hold big positions and big titles.
Yes. And as we think about, you're talking a lot about that individual and the characteristics of a leader and what personifies those strong leadership characteristics. But I always think a good bit about, this concept of from me to we to the world. So it's how do you yourself be the leader you can and should be, but then how do we lead our teams and how do we set them up for success, particularly as they're navigating so many unknowns during this time and in business normally anyway. But are there specific aspects of leading your team and also setting your team up to be strong leaders that you could share with our community?
Yes, it's such a great question. So I would start by saying that leaders are balancing always the short term and the long term, the current state with the future state. And what I mean by that is, first of all, a leader, particularly in a crisis, but always, but particularly in a crisis, a leader has to be clear-eyed, realistic, truthful, candid. Where are we really? Where are we really? What is our current state? What are our problems? What are our challenges? Because if people don't understand where they really are, what the problems truly look like, then you're not going to make sufficient progress to going somewhere better and solving problems for the better. But toggling as well between that short-term, clear-eyed, realistic assessment of where are we, but then also lifting people's heads up to say, where could we be? Where can we go to a better future state? In a crisis, what happens sometimes is people get so overwhelmed by the depth and the magnitude of the difficulties in the current state that they stop thinking about the longer term. They stop thinking about the future state. And that's the worst thing to do, Because the only way to make progress, to take advantage actually of the opportunity that a crisis can present, and a crisis can present an opportunity to really prioritize, to really rethink what's not working so well, that now we have an opportunity to change. But without that vision, that ability to keep focusing people, raise people's heads and sights and say, but we are going somewhere. And it can be better than where we are now. And we need to keep that long term in mind so that every decision we make in the short term is informed by where we want to be in the long term. I think that's really important, that toggling between short term and long term, between current state and future state. I would add to that leaders need to be very explicit about, in order to align teams so that everyone can achieve more, because we all can achieve more working in a team than we can achieve working on our own. That's just a fact. We all can achieve more working with a team than we can working on our own. In order to have a team aligned, leaders need to be so explicit and consistent about what are we trying to achieve? What are we trying to achieve? What are our goals, both in the short term and the long term? Who's got to do what? Let's get clear about ownership and accountability in the short term and the long term. How are we going to measure our progress? What results are we trying to achieve? And then finally, how should we behave? What are our values? How do we actually show up for each other? The goals, the who does what and accountabilities, the metrics, the results we're trying to achieve, our values, our behavior. That's what I call the leadership framework. And leaders have to keep all of those aspects of the framework, all of those dimensions in mind and constantly in front of themselves and a team in order to keep people aligned and moving forward and achieving.
Carly, your impressive resume, which thank you so much for sharing some of your learnings with us today. Even framing that kind of future state around just, I think during a time of crisis and pandemic for a lot of leaders, our concern is that there's so much unknown. But the reframing that you just did around it's less about the known than what we know. It's more about where we want to be. Like envision what that is and then go for that. It can be whatever you want it to be. It doesn't have to be, structured on this, I don't want to say not structured on reality, but it doesn't have to be that, linear path necessarily.
Yes. And Kristy, I apologize for interrupting, but it's so important what you just said. The future is always unknown. And we forget that until a crisis hits. But the truth is, we never can predict the future. I mean, I learned that the hard way when suddenly I was diagnosed suddenly with cancer, or when I learned my daughter was going to die because of her addictions. We never know the future. We just think we do. We just think we do. And a crisis reminds us, oh my gosh, I didn't know this was coming. So we never know the future. We never can predict the future, but we can shape the future by how we behave and what goals we decide to tackle and what problems we choose to solve in collaboration with others.
Yes. I'm so inspired right now. I wanted to ask a question. So beyond all of the amazing work you've done, from boards to philanthropy through, major companies and political arena, you've also published 3 books. And the last one was called Find Your Way, Unleash Your Power and Highest Potential. So you've shared a lot with us today, but are there more insights you wanted to offer up around how you found your way?
Well, first, I wrote the book, Kristy, Find Your Way, and I hope your listeners will find it useful. I wrote the book because I really wanted to crystallize, to the best of my ability, everything I've learned about leadership in every sphere across many decades, particularly for those people, women, who don't think they're leaders, but who are absolutely capable of leadership and who actually might be leading from where they are. They just don't know it. They don't call it leadership. That's why I wrote the book, because I think so often people don't achieve their full potential because they don't see themselves as being able to have an impact, because they feel powerless, perhaps. One of the things that I've learned over and over and over again, not just in my own life, but in the observation of so many people, and if you don't mind, I'll tell a brief story from the book to make this point, but everyone has more potential than we realize. Everyone has more potential than we realize. And so for me, what gets me going is this look that people get in their eyes when they realize they can do more than they thought they could do. That look for me is fuel. And I see it in teams that start problem solving. I see it in people I've met. We all can do more than we think we can. And that's why I wrote this book. And so if I may just tell one story from the book, one of the things that I had the privilege to do was chair an organization called Opportunity International, which is a microfinance organization. Microfinance, as I'm sure you know, is the lending of very small amounts of money to extremely poor people, those who are living on less than $2 a day, along with providing entrepreneurship training so that they can start to build a business and stop living hand to mouth. And I was in New Delhi, India for a board meeting, and I wanted to meet with some of our clients. And so I traveled to the slums of New Delhi to meet with some of the women who were taking our training and our loans. I don't know if you've ever been to the slums of New Delhi or whether our listeners have, but they are desperate places, just devastating poverty. And so I was climbing up this rickety ladder in the middle of this terrible slum to sit down with these 10 women. And I was really steeling myself because I thought, oh my gosh, these circumstances are so desperate. And I am going to see desperation in our clients' eyes. But when I sat down, I didn't see desperation. I saw women who were hopeful and determined and focused and proud of what they had accomplished. And one woman in particular sticks in my mind. She told me her story. She lived in desperate poverty. Her family had always lived in desperate poverty. And she was just told, manage, do the best you can with what you got. I mean, this is what we do. We endure. And she had a friend who had taken this loan who encouraged her, come on, take a loan, take the training. You can help your family. But in her culture, women didn't do this. And so her husband said no. And her parents said no, and her in-laws said no. Everyone she knew said, no, this isn't what women do. Just manage. Just do the best you can with what you have. But eventually, she found the courage, and she took the loan. And I asked her, well, what does your family think now? And she said, oh, they're all very happy. They work for me. Now, imagine what it took. That woman, I mean, none of us are ever going to hear of her again. She's not famous. She has no title, but she changed the order of things for the better. She solved the problem that was right in front of her. She lifted up her family and so many others in her community. She unlocked her own potential. And those kind of people inspired me to write this book, because if she can do that, each of us can do that.
That's such a good story. Carly, I want to lighten this up a little bit about you and ask it's called our lightning round. I'm going to ask you some specific questions, answer in one word or less, or one sentence or less.
Always.
I know. Are you
one word? Yikes.
I know. Are you an introvert or an extrovert?
Extrovert.
What's your favorite day of the week?
Friday.
Are you an early bird or a night owl?
Early bird. That's 2 words.
Who's your dream dinner guest?
Jack Nicholson. That's 2 words.
Oh, but that's a good one. Can I ask why?
Well, he's just the proverbial bad boy, and he has played such fantastic roles versus such fantastic leading ladies.
Mm-hmm.
And I just love to hear some of those stories.
That's good. What is your pet peeve?
Pet peeve. Oh, I don't know. My husband probably tops the list so many times, and I love him to death. But certain things he'll do, I guess, would qualify as my pet peeve.
I think we all feel that sometimes. What is your favorite Monday morning staple, ritual, thing that you need to do to start your week off?
Actually, this isn't one word, sorry, but it's the same thing every day. I have to get up early. I have to have a couple hours to myself with my coffee, my dog, and my husband. I have to center myself for the day, and then I have to work out. And if I don't get those things in on a morning, I'm not as good the rest of the day.
What's your favorite recent read?
Oh, well, I'm in the middle of it, actually. Oh, gosh. It's not exactly light, but it's Balin's Intellectual Origins of the American Revolution. And it's actually quite fascinating because it does help me put the current partisan rancor into some context.
Are there anything else you want to share about that? I'm asking personally. I mean, I'm like really fascinated by this and would love if you wouldn't mind just any like quick thoughts about how.
Quick thoughts. George Washington said in 1789, "The trouble with political parties is they will come to care only about winning." Mm-hmm. I think he got that right. Yep. I think that's a lot of where we are. Politics has become like a team sport, my team, no matter what. And I would just say, I think as citizens, we need to think a whole lot less about politics and a whole lot more about leadership.
That is very, very well said. Thank you for that. What is your top self-care practice?
I guess I'd have to say working out, honestly. If I don't get enough exercise, the Greeks once said, I was a philosophy major, remember, sound body, sound mind. And I find that to be true. And finally, a final piece of advice or thought that you want to leave with our listeners? The fact that you're afraid of something is completely normal and completely human. Practice getting over it. Because every time you face a fear, it gets easier. It's like working out. It gets easier every time. And every time you do it, you will unlock more of your own potential. You will have a bigger positive impact, and you'll be a better leader. Thank you so much, Carly, for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast and for sharing just such this depth of inspiration and knowledge. I've learned so much. I know our listeners have as well. And it's just been an honor to talk to you today. Thank you so much, Kristy. It's been a great conversation. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes. Give us 5 stars and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at EllevateNTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.